Thank you, Ms. Weinstein. I have a couple of questions on public protection as well in regards to the must-issue desk appearance tickets by police officers. So, does the desk appearance ticket requirement prevent police officers from taking an individual to the precinct from the location of occurrence? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Sure. So, does the desk appearance ticket requirement prevent police officers from taking an individual to the precinct from the location of occurrence?
No, I believe, most respectfully, that's where the desk is located.
Okay. So, what constitutes a reasonable opportunity for a principal to make their verifiable identity known for a desk appearance ticket?
Well, you can see what type of ID that an individual has and produce it. In fact, that's what most police officers do in normal identification stops at this moment.
Yeah, at this moment, if they don't provide ID, they go through the system. They get the arrest is affected. So this
Under
would
the
prevent,
bill, that will continue.
I'm sorry, say,
Under this particular bill, that will continue.
but no, it actually, reading it, it says if they can't provide photo ID, it's not required.
I'm sorry. An officer is not required to issue an appearance ticket if the person cannot be identified. But it is also worth noting that there are various different forms of identification that can be provided. Some could be government issued. It could be a benefit card that gets issued. But in accordance with principles of community policing, there are many instances where a police officer will identify the person who's coming into their jurisdiction and be able to identify them in that way as well.
Well, oftentimes, and I'll refer back to when I worked in Midtown Manhattan, in Midtown North. It was a transient location. So oftentimes people that were placed under arrest and brought back to the precinct did not reside or work in the area. So some officers may not be able to identify them that way. So the question was, what would constitute giving that principal, that defendant, the reasonable time to identify them?
I don't believe that a time period comes into question here. It's whether or not the person can be identified. If they can be identified, then a desk appearance ticket, if under those particular circumstances are warranted, will be given at that particular point in time. If the person's identification cannot be assessed at that particular time, the officer is not required to issue a desk appearance ticket.
Okay. Still a little fuzzy with the reasonable time, but I can move on. So if an individual is arrested for shoplifting, and during the arrest, the individual resists arrest, which are both misdemeanors, would the police officer have to issue a desk appearance ticket, even though the conduct is a little more severe than the shoplifting?
It would be an appearance ticket in that situation.
Wow, okay. So if the person, and I was reading the bill, the language of the bill, and I understood that if the person was intoxicated or mental health issues, a desk appearance doesn't have to be issued. And also if, of course, driving, any offense where a court can suspend a driver's license, I know that the officer wouldn't have to issue a desk appearance ticket. So the question I have is, what would constitute a reasonable effort in that case when the person may be intoxicated to the point where they can harm themselves? It says before making the arrest, the officer has to make a reasonable effort to get the person the services and issue the DAT. So,
well, particularly, there is an interest here in order to not persecute or prosecute individuals based on their mental health condition or their health condition. So if there's a circumstance that may be utilized where we can get the individual medical attention, then we believe medical attention is warranted in that particular situation. But you also brought up the situation regarding whether or not someone is driving while intoxicated. Of course, if someone is pulled over and charged with that particular offense, we don't want to give them a desk appearance ticket at that particular point in time so that they could potentially harm someone.
Yeah.
So we have also did not make the requirement that a police officer has to issue a desk appearance ticket in those particular circumstances.
Absolutely. I read that. I fully understand that about the driving offense. But my questions hinge on what constitutes a reasonable effort and a reasonable time before the officer can change it from a desk appearance ticket to an actual arrest, and the individual the principal goes through the system and goes before the court. That's the issue.
Well, I believe that, a reasonable person will be able to ascertain a reasonable time period and a reasonable set of circumstances. And I recognize that all of those issues will sort of be based on whatever gets presented at that time. And you got to use your best judgment.
That's a large gray area, especially when it can wind up leading to lawsuits and accusations of being detained for a longer period of time. So that's just one of the clarifications that I think should be made.
I agree. However, I don't believe that there's any different set of circumstances in this situation and in any particular police encounter where there may be a mental health situation that needs to be assessed or a healthcare situation that needs to be assessed. So this isn't adding any additional requirements on a police officer having to utilize their reasonable sensibilities in order to determine whether or not this is a situation that might warrant them to take an additional step prior to making their assessment as to whether or not to arrest or to issue a desk appearance ticket.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I just have some other questions. Would the chair yield?
Be happy to.
Thank you. I just want to touch on the New York City mayoral control of public schools. I see in the bill that we're actually expanding the panel for educational policy to 15 members.
Correct.
So we're adding an appointee that's elected by the presidents of the community education councils throughout the city, and an additional appointment by the mayor. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we gave the mayor another appointment, and we also, I see in the legislation that it allows any appointee to still be removed, but it only requires the appointing authority to notify the public within 10 days. Is that correct?
But the mayor appointed has to the mayor appointed? To increase the number of mayor appointees? No, I understand that. I'm asking. I'm sorry, I was just looking at when you were talking about the additional mayoral appointee to the PEP. Right, so in terms of the removal of a member from the PEP, we're just talking, you were asking, so the appointing authority shall provide to the public written notice of the reasons at least 10 days in advance of the removal.
So is there any debate about the person being removed, or is it just we're telling you that we're removing them and that's it?
It's the reasons why the person is proposed to be removed.
Right. Thank you. On the bill, please, Mr. Speaker.
Sir.
So on mayoral control, where this is presented in this bill, and unfortunately, it's not increasing transparency or accountability. We can pretend that we're adjusting the PEP and it's got some teeth, but unfortunately, it doesn't. And once again, we're just allowing rubber stamps by the PEP for policies where we can have some real checks and balances. It's a missed opportunity And you know what? Hopefully we will have some hearings on it, but if we're extending this as is, it falls short. And we're once again kicking the can down the road. Thank you.